Hello and welcome. I'm excited to sew with you today. Today I'm sewing the Cali Pinafore. It's a pattern from Designer Stitch, and I am using a linen fabric that is from Fabric Wholesale Direct. And I'm really excited to be making one in this fabric. And I wanted to show you what it looks like all washed up. I washed it twice. You want to pre-wash your fabric really well just so that you can get any shrinking out so that your finished product doesn't misbehave on you later on. But I wanted to show you this texture, how beautiful this fabric is before we get started. And this is going to be an easy fabric to make this pinafore out of, just because it's not as thick of a weight. This fabric, this pattern calls for a fabric that does not have stretch. And so you want something like a denim or a thicker twill. And this is going to be on the lighter weight end of the spectrum. So it's going to be much easier for us to work with. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to head over to the iron and we're going to press it really well. And once we have it all pressed out, we're going to cut out our pieces. Let's get started. Okay, hello. So I just finished ironing all my fabric and I have my pieces printed, and I wanted to talk to you about sizing. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you is about how to pick your bust size. So to pick your bust size, you're going to measure your over bust, and you're going to take that measurement that goes over your bust, and that will be how you pick your bust. So if you measure a 34 right here, then you're going to pick size 1. And then you're going to find out your cup size. So you're going to measure your full bust, and you're going to take the difference in those. So let's say that your over bust is 34 and your full bust is 36. That's a 2-inch difference. So that means that you're a B cup and you do not need to print anything extra. So any 1 to 2 inch difference is a B cup, and there's no need to print an extra cup. So if you have more than a 1 to 2 inch difference, then you will need to print out a cup. So a 2 to 3 inch difference would be the C cup. And here is what the C cup looks like, is this. And is how you do that is, this is the waistline, and then there's a waistline printed on the pattern. So you're just going to match those up, and it gives you the extra that you need for that cup size. And if you're a 3 to 4 inch difference, then you're a D cup. 4 to 5 inch difference, you're a double D cup. So that's how you pick on the bust size. So on the pattern, you're also going to want to pick your waist size, which is your natural waist, not the waist where you wear your pants. It's usually right where you bend. It's the smallest part in your torso, and that'll be your waist size. And then you also want to pick your hip size, and you're going to want to draw a line, just a smooth line between those. And your hip size will be the fullest part of your bottom, and that is for your front. For your back, let me show you. And also for your front, you'll have your front facing, and you're just going to print out the one that corresponds with the cup that you printed. And this is what you use to give a clean finish to your edges on your front. Okay, so now let's talk about, I'm going to set these aside. We're going to talk about your upper back. All of these, you're cutting mirror images. You're not cutting on the fold for these. Or actually, are you? Yes, you're cutting mirror images of that. Okay, so on your back, you have 2 pieces. You have your upper back and you have your lower back. And both of these are cut as mirror images, and you have 2 options on your back. You can do the racer back, which is a little bit shallower, shows more of your shoulder. And then there's also a normal cut line. And whichever cut line you decide is going to depend on also the cut line that you're going to use on your back facing. So there's a back facing for whenever you cut standard, and then one for racer back. And that's how you get your clean finish on your back. So the next thing you're going to want to decide is on your strap. So there's 3 different straps. There's your standard strap, and that's what if you pick the standard strap, the standard cut line on your back, or the racer back. So you're only going to do one or the other. Or if you don't like either of those, there is a knot strap. And the knot strap allows you to tie a knot right here and adjust, while the other straps, you're just sewing them. They're not adjustable unless you're doing the ring and the slider. Okay. You're also going to need a button facing. The button facing is what closes it on the side. So you're going to need to cut those. Last thing we're going to talk about is pockets. So you can have a chest pocket. There are 2 different pockets here. You can do a rounded one, or you can do the one with the point, or you can do none at all. I think I'm going to do none at all for the chest. And then you have your 2 pockets, and these are the pockets that go down here for you to put your hands in. And you have 3 options on those. You could have the slant pocket, you can have a curved pocket, or you can have a rounded one on that one. I'm going to pick the slant pocket. And then lastly, you can have a back pocket, and this is going to be like on your bottom. You can do one or two. So those are the pockets. I'm going to cut out all my pieces, and then we're going to get started. I have all my pieces cut out, and I just wanted to show you on these 4 pieces that you'll need to be cutting out of your main fabric, but then you'll also need to cut them out of a lightweight interfacing, and that is for your front facing, your back facing, your button facing, and your button extension. So is what we're going to do, like let's say on our button facing, we have cut it out as mirror images, and we're going to find the wrong side of our fabric. And then on your interfacing, there's one side that is pebbly and kind of rough, and then there's one side that's smoother. So the side that is rough will face the wrong side of your fabric like this. And then I'm going to lay it on the ironing board and press it down until it adheres to it. This is an iron-on interfacing that becomes one with the fabric. And then once we have it ironed down, we'll treat them just as one piece, like this. So I'm going to get my ironing done and get these interfaced, and then we'll get ready to start on our pockets. So now that we're done interfacing our pieces, you should have them, they should look like this, to where it's just one piece and a little bit sturdier. The interfacing helps the fabric not to stretch or to warp or to get out of shape. Now you're going to grab whichever pocket you have decided on. You can do front pockets and a chest pocket, and you can do all the pockets if you want. Or you can just pick one, or you can pick none. But the first step is going to be to work on our pockets. So what you're going to do is you're going to have your right side facing up, and they'll be mirrored images of each other. And then you're going to fold this down to the right side, and then we're going to sew all along right here with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So only on where these raw edges are meeting. And then once we've done that, we can flip it to the back. So go ahead and sew these down, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so now your pockets should look like this, and this is the right side of my fabric. And all you're going to do is turn this end where it looks like this. So now that it's folded to the underside, you're just going to kind of poke your pockets through to make them nice and crisp. And then we're going to go to the ironing board, and once you're at the ironing board, you're going to iron down. So you're just going to continue this fold. So that's initially stitched, and you're going to fold all the edges under 3/8 of an inch and iron them down. So all along, and once we have them ironed down, we also need to stitch down this overlapped edge. Okay, now that you have all of your edges ironed under, this is what your right side is going to look like, and here is your wrong side. And we're going to go to the machine, and we are just going to stitch down this wide one. So none of the other edges, only across here. You're just going to stitch on the edge to stitch that down, and we're going to do that on both pockets, and then we'll be ready to attach them to the front of our pinafore. Now that I have the pocket opening stitched down, I am going to stitch the pocket to the front of the pinafore. You should have a line to line at the bottom of it up with. And then you see how linen can kind of move around. You're just going to make sure that this edge right here is nice and parallel with the straight edge right here. And then the pocket opening is facing where your armscye is. So I'm going to press all that down, and then I'm going to get either pins or Wonder Tape or something like that just to hold the pocket in place while I'm on my way to the machine. And we're going to stitch all around. So we're going to start on one end, go down all the way here to here to here. And then we'll do that on both, and then our pockets will be attached. Okay, so now I'm at my machine, and I'm going to stitch my pocket down. I am going to, if you want like a contrasting thread, you can put that in. I'm using one that's very similar to my pocket. I have my pocket all pinned down. And you're not stitching right on the edge, you're stitching, it's about, I would call it an edge stitch, about 1/8 of an inch away. Somewhere maybe even between 1/8 and 1/4. Okay, now we are going to grab our straps and you're going to fold them in half this way, like this. And we're going to stitch all along the long end, like this. So you're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and you're going to sew all along that long end. You're going to do that on both of them. Okay, so now since your straps are sewn with the right side facing in, we're going to turn them to the right side. So you're going to get a safety pin or some kind of other tube turner, and you're going to turn it all to the right side by taking that safety pin and shoving it through. Okay, so now your straps should be 1 inch wide, and I give mine a really good press so that they lay nice and flat. And once you've done that, we're going to top stitch them down. So you're just going to stitch right along the edges on both sides. So 2 rows of stitching all the way down here on both straps. And again, I'm using the same color of thread to top stitch, but you can definitely use a different color if you want. Like if you're doing a jeans fabric, I would use a gold color or something. I'm just using a coordinating thread. So now we're going to set our straps aside and we're going to grab our upper and lower back pieces. And you should have 2 of each that are mirrored. And as what you're going to do now is you're going to put them right sides together and you are going to sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance all along where you have them. We're going to clip them all together. I'm going to grab several clips. And once we have sewn all along there, then we are going to fold it up this way to where the right side is showing, and we're going to top stitch our seam allowance down. Okay, and we're going to do that on both sides. I've put both of my back pieces together, and I just wanted to show you that before I top stitched this seam down, that I serged it with my serger to finish this raw edge so that it doesn't fray. And then I pressed it down towards the lower to the bottom, and then I did 2 rows of top stitching, and I did that on both sides. So now I'm going to lay them right next to each other, and I'm going to put the right sides of each of my back pieces together, and I'm going to sew down that center back seam. I'm also going to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance, just the way I did on the other one, and I'm going to press it. Well, before I press it, I'm going to finish it with my serger so that there's not that raw edge. And then after I finish it with my serger, then I will press it and I will top stitch it down. And then we will have completed our back piece and we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Okay, so if you notice, I serged each of my seams separately, and then as soon as I was done serging them separately, I pressed them open. So this is the wrong side of what my back looks like, and the front looks like this. So now I'm just going to go through and top stitch both of these down on my regular machine. And you definitely can serge them to where the seam is together and just press to one side, but I like how nice and smooth it is to have the top stitching on both sides, and it makes for not as bulky of a seam. Now you're going to grab your button extension piece. It looks like this, and you want to fold it in half where the right sides are together. And now that you have the right sides together, you want to take that and we're going to stitch the top and the bottom, and we're going to stitch them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So pay attention on this step because we have lots of different seam allowances that we're working with. That's the thing I noticed in this pattern is it has a reason behind each of the seam allowances, and if you pay attention to what they are on each step, then it'll come out beautifully. And it's nice to have the 5/8 inch seam allowance on some where it's needed for fitting reasons, while others you don't need any kind of fitting, so it's nice to have a not bulky seam that you don't have to trim down. So the 1/4 inch is nice here. And you're gonna, you have 2 of these pieces to do that too. So you're going to fold this one in half as well and stitch the short ends. Okay, now I'm going to take these to the ironing board and I'm going to press them. Well, first I'm going to open them up. So you're going to turn it to where now everything is on the right side. Like this, and then you want to like create some clean corners by poking out your corners. And then you want to press everything nice and firm on both of these. And once you have it nice and pressed, grab your back piece that you just finished top stitching, and we're going to stitch it onto our back piece. Okay, so now you're going to take those extensions and you're going to lay them on both sides of the pinafore, and is where you want it to sit. Let me just zoom in and show you, is exactly 3/8 inch underneath this, where this arm side is. So, and it should be right on top of that seam that you top stitched right here. So you're going to pin it there, and then we are going to sew it on with a 5/8 inch seam allowance right here, and we're going to do that on both sides. So, and look how nice and it presses. And I used a chopstick to turn out my corners so that they're nice and crisp. So I'm going to sew this down, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, now you're going to take your straps and you're going to lay them on the right side of your back piece, and you want them to be a 1/4 inch away from this. So you're going to put them right sides together. So whichever you want to be your right side facing out is going to go on the right side of your back, and then just pin them at the top, and we're going to sew them down across the top, leaving a 1/4 inch right here. Okay, so I'm sewing this strap on with a 1/4 inch, and you're really just kind of basting each one on, back stitching a lot, making sure the side facing down is the side that you like the best. Now you want to set your back piece aside and grab your 2 front pieces, and you're going to want to identify which one is the center front seam of each. So the center front seam is the one that's just one long edge. It doesn't have the cutout for the armhole. And we're going to serge down the center piece on each side. You could do this after you do the seam, or you could do it before. I just want to finish this raw edge. And we're going to do this on both of our front center seams. Now we're at the sewing machine, and we're going to take both of those front pieces, and that seam that we just serged separately, we're going to put them right sides facing like this, and we're going to sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance all down our center front. And then as soon as we're done sewing down our center front, we're going to press it open and then top stitch it. Okay, so now that I finished this seam, I pressed it open. So this is what the back side looks like all along my front center. And this is what the right side looks like. And now I'm just going to, from the wrong side, it's just easier. You can do it from either side though, but I'm going to top stitch this down on both sides. Okay, now we are ready to assemble our front and our side seam. So we're going to put our front and our back right sides facing. And we're going to sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance all along here. Well, I'll start at the bottom, or you can start at the top, but either way, you're going to sew all along here with 5/8 inch seam allowance, stopping right when you get here. So right here. So you're not going to sew over that. That's called your button extension. So right when you get to that where you attach the button extension to your back, you're going to stop right there and make sure that it's almost like it's a seamless line, but you're going to be able to open this. Do you see that? So we're going to do that on both side seams, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now that we have our front and back together, now is the time to try it on and to adjust the side seams if you need to adjust your side seams. Also, if you're doing regular straps that are not the knot or the adjustable ones, you're going to want to attach them to your front, right sides together, and sew that down. Try it on, see if you need to adjust. I've made this pattern before without doing the adjustable straps, and when I did, I had to take like 3 inches off of my strap. So just pay attention to that if you want to make sure it sits on the right spot on you. Okay, but since I'm doing the knot straps on this one, I don't need to do that. So what we're going to do next is we're going to get our back facing, and we're going to finish the seam that goes all along the bottom of it. So only this facing. So you are only serging all along this bottom part. And once we have that serged, I'll show you how we're going to attach it to our back. Okay, see, so I have the seam underneath all serged, and now I'm going to put it right sides together. Let me zoom you out a little bit. I'm going to put it right sides together onto the back. And once it's facing down like this, we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all along this top right here, and then all along this arm edge on both sides. But when we get to the side seam, we're going to sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance just along where that facing is, and you're going to catch the button extension in it, and it's the same seam allowance that you used for the button extension, and that's 5/8 inch. So just make sure that you're paying attention, that you're using the right seam allowances in the right place. So if you're on the side seam, you're doing a 5/8 inch seam, and if you are on the arm seam, or if you're on the top of the back, it's a 1/4 inch. Okay, so let's head to the machine and let's sew that one. Okay, so I'm ready to start sewing. I went ahead and put clips all along that edge just so that I can make sure that I kept everything even. And I'm going to start on the side seam so you can see my button extension underneath that's sandwiched in between the back facing and then the back main. And I'm going to start with my 5/8 inch seam allowance just because I'm on the side seam. And then I'm going to sew until I get right over. You can feel it when you get over that button extension. And then I'll go like one more. And then now I'll pick up my presser foot, but leave your needle down. And then sew all along. And it's nice to sew on the interfaced side up because the interfacing is not going to stretch while your fabric can. So that's the reason that we interface that back, is to give it some structure and to keep the shape of the garment. So sewing with the interfacing up helps you to keep that keep the shape. If you've done any quilting work, then you're used to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Before I sewed clothes, I did a lot more quilts, and so it's always exciting when I get to do something with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Even though it's not good in areas where you need to do fitting on a garment, you need that 5/8 inch seam allowance, which is why this pattern has the 5/8 inch on the side seams and on any area that you need to be able to adjust. But on areas that don't need adjustment, it's nice to have that smooth 1/4 inch seam allowance, and it gives you a less bulky seam. I need to take one more. And I'm only sewing enough to go over the facing. Okay, now I'm going to trim that and let's go on to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to grab our front facing and our button facing. And on your button facing, you are going to want to finish some raw edges on it, not all of them. The ones that are important is the short edge and the bottom edge. So on both of them, you're going to either, if you have a serger, use your serger and just do a line of serge stitches along the short end and this short end on both of them. And if you don't have that and you only have a sewing machine, just do a really tight zigzag so that those edges don't fray. And you're going to do the same finishing that you did on your back facing, on your front facing, all along this bottom curve. So we're going to go to the serger. I'm going to do that really quick, and then I'll be back to pin it to my front. finished. You can see where I've serged it. Now I'm going to take the facing. You can see where my front facing I've also serged on the underneath curve, and I'm going to put it right sides down, just like I did on my back facing, right sides down on the front. Matching up those armholes. And then I'm going to take my button facing and I'm going to match up. See, that one doesn't go with that because the side seam doesn't match. You see how that, so it goes on this side where it matches the side seam. And I'm going to put the other one on the same way, matching the side seam. And you also want to kind of match up to where it matches the button extension that you applied to the front. You're going to notice, I'm sorry, that you applied to the back. You're going to notice that there. So also match those up. And we're going to clip or pin all of that together and then head to the sewing machine. When we get to the sewing machine, we're going to pay attention to seam allowances. Remember, if we're on a side seam, we're sewing with a 5/8 inch seam allowance if we're on the side. And if you're on the arm side, the curve of the arm, or you're on the top, you're sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. And if you're doing the non-adjustable straps, you're going to have those straps sandwiched on the front up here. Since I'm not, then I don't have that there, but I'm just making note that if you sewed those down, that they would be sandwiched underneath this front facing. Okay, and I just realized I told you wrong. You're going to actually also need to serge this longer end on the button facing on both sides, because that part is going to be sticking out. So you want to have that finished and not fraying. So I'm going to go back to the machine and also serge down that side. Okay, so we are going to start, remember on the side seams, we're doing a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and you should be starting right above where you left off on sewing your side seams so that you kind of, I guess you could use the term marry your seams, so there's not a big gap between where your side seam started, where you sewed your front and back together, and where your side seam starts, where you're sewing your facing down. And we're sewing 5/8 inch on the side seam until we get to the underarm seam, and then now we're sewing a 1/4 inch. And again, I like to sew from the interface side because it has less, it's not going to stretch it out or warp the fabric any when you're sewing. It's going to give a more stable, you're not going to distort your garment. The interfacing really helps to keep everything nice and sturdy. Okay, now that we have finished doing the front facing and the back facing, we, if you lay it down, it's inside out right now, and then this is what the right side looks like. And we're going to go back and we're going to finish our side seams. So what we're going to do is we're going to start, you can start anywhere on the front. Actually, I think is where I'm going to start is on the bottom. So you're not sewing your side seams all together, you're sewing them individually. So you're going to go all along. So like this is the front, and I'm going to go all along here. And then whenever I get to the button, see it where it separates, and then I'm going to go over the button facing, and then all over the front facing and the top, all over this, all of this with my serger. If you don't have a serger, then you're going to want to use a sewing machine with a tight zigzag just to prevent those edges from fraying. And you're going to do the front all together. Then I'm going to open this up and I'm going to do the back all together. I'm going to do the same thing where I go all the way up and down this side seam. And then when I get here, I'm going to also finish the button extension. And then I'm going to finish the edge right here, the top, the arm side, and I'm going to do that all on the back. So right now our main step is just a lot of serging. And we're doing our front and back. We're finishing them independent of each other. Okay. Now that we have all of our side seams finished and we have all of our edge finished for our front and our back, we're going to take and give our side seams a nice press. So that'll help them to look more professional. And when you're dealing with linen, you want to do a lot of pressing. So I gave my front and my back, both of them, a really good press. I made sure I used a chopstick and I poked through both of the corners. This is what it looks like on the wrong side, and whenever I pressed it to where the button extension is out this way, So now I'm going to go back and I'm just going to top stitch over this seam. So about anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch away. I'm just going to go through all along here and top stitch my front and my back just to hold that facing where I want it to be. On the front, when you're top stitching, you can top stitch it where the facing is on the button. So just so that you can give that nice little top stitching detail right here for the button facing, and then up around here. I'm going to do that on my regular machine. Let's head over there. Okay, so now that you've top stitched, you have finished the main parts of the body. All we have left to do is to hem and to do buttonholes and buttons. So this is what it's gonna look like. You're going to take this button extension and push it towards the inside and then overlap the front onto the back like this. We're gonna put buttonholes on our front. We'll put 3. And then on the button extension, we're gonna put 3 buttons. On the front, if you're doing the knot straps, we're going to need to put a buttonhole right here and a buttonhole right here to be able to put this strap through it. And the bottom, there's a 2-inch hem allowance. So that means we'll iron it to the wrong side, folding it under twice. And I think the next step is going to be to pick out our buttons and to sew the buttonholes. So we have 8 buttonholes to get through. So I would recommend getting a piece of scrap that is very similar to the fabric that you're putting the buttonhole through, practicing it, making sure you're very comfortable with your machine, your settings, making the adjustments you need to make for the particular fabric that you're using, and then doing the buttonholes. And there's not buttonhole markings on here per se, so you're just going to want to gauge with your eyes where you think they would visually look good. I'm going to put them right here, and right here. And I'll just make sure they're even on both sides. Okay, I'm going to head to the machine and start my buttonholes. Okay, so I realized that I needed to work my buttonholes a little bit closer up, higher up on this. So I actually started it at 1.5 inches away from this bottom opening and then spaced them 2 inches apart from there. So now let's get started on working this buttonhole. Okay, now we are ready to open up our buttonholes. So you're going to get your seam ripper and a pin and put your seam ripper, let me make sure I'm on camera so you can see me. You're going to put your seam ripper inside the stitching on one end, and then you're going to put the pin through this on the inside of the stitching on the other end. This is how it looks. And then you're going to seam rip the fabric, not the stitches. You're just going to pull that fabric away until you get to that pin. And see, that pin kind of serves as a safety stop so you don't rip through your stitches. And then I'm just going to make sure, I'm going to put the seam ripper here and make sure I got all of it. I just need a little bit. There you go. And now we have an open buttonhole using a seam ripper. Okay, now that we have our buttonholes worked, it's time to put on our buttons. So first we're going to mark where we want our buttons to be. And I use a marker and I put it through my buttonhole and I mark from the inside part of the buttonhole. So not on this side, but the side that's closer to this seam. And we're going to mark all 6 of those. So we're going to just position it where we want it to be whenever it's all finished, and then mark on the inside and do all 6 of those. And then take your presser foot off of your machine, or at least this is how I put a button on. Some people like to sew them on by hand. Other people have different ways, but I use my machine just without a presser foot. And then I have a stitch on my machine that sews the button. Okay, so we'll get right to that. So I have my first point marked, and I'm just going to set my button down on that. If you're having a hard time keeping that in line, you can just put a piece of tape over your button. Sometimes it's harder on the bigger buttons to see exactly where your mark is and to hold it. Once I have it under the machine, I put my presser foot down, and then on my machine it's stitch number 13. And I like to do my first few stitches using my hand wheel just to make sure that my machine is going to go wide enough on that button and that I'm not going to break my needle or break my button. And see, like right now it's not doing it as wide Once I know it's the right width, I go several times. Can grab that out of the way. And it's nice to not have that presser foot because you have a lot of control. And I like to continue to do it by hand just in case there's one point. See, and then now when it's tying off, I know it's done with that. So now I will do this ways. So that button is in. I'm going to tie these strings in a knot, and then I'm going to do the other 5. And once we're done with that, we'll be ready to hem. Okay, we are on our final step. This is where you definitely want to try it on. I tried mine on, and I put clips where I wanted my hem to be. So you're going to want to measure that. I also put some pins in there. And is what you need to do is you're going to want to fold in the raw edge under about a 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch this way, and then fold it again this way at the where you want it to be hemmed. We'll iron it down really well. We'll go to the machine, and I like to stitch from the underside to make sure that I have an even distance away. Give your entire pinafore a very good press, and thank you so much for sewing with me. I hope you enjoyed it.